We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this island. Good evening, and welcome to the 2018 Fleming Medal Ceremony. My name is Stephen Chait, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Royal Canadian Institute of Science. Tonight, RCIScience will award the 36th Sandford Fleming Medal. The medal was first awarded in 1982 to David Suzuki for his work in increasing public awareness of the environment. Since then, the award has been given to many luminaries of Canadian science, to scientists who felt it was important to talk about their work. Past winners include Ursula Franklin, Chris Hadfield, Bob McDonald, and Joe Schwartz. In this room tonight, we're delighted to have John Dirks and Paul Delaney, two past medal winners. And Ivan Semeniuk joined us briefly before leaving to teach his evening class, true the form of a medal winner. Connecting people with science and connecting people who love science is at the heart of what we do, and is why the Royal Canadian Institute recognizes Canadians who do that so well with the Fleming Medal. To tell us more about the Institute and about the person for whom this medal was named, I'm delighted to introduce Jacques Fleming, trustee of the RCIScience Board and descendant of Sir Sandford Fleming. Please welcome Jacques Fleming.
Evening. The Institute is one of the oldest continuous running organizations in Canada, formed 169 years ago by my great-great-grandfather, Sir Sandford Fleming. Toronto was not even a part of Canada as we know it. Even the concept of scientist was quite new. But even all those years ago, it was clear that to make this country strong, we needed science, and we needed a place for people with an interest in ideas to come together and share them. That was the Institute's reason for being. When a 22-year-old Sandford Fleming and his fellow surveyors, engineers, and entrepreneurs first got together, they realized there was a lot of interest in research happening in a young country, but very few ways to share it. That became the Institute's key role, to connect people and ideas. Attracted by the concept of preserving special land for future generations, members of the Institute lobbied to create Algonquin Park. On learning about artifacts from pre-colonial times, at an Institute lecture, members organized that the city should have a museum, which eventually became the Royal Ontario Museum. And of course, there are time zones. Sandford Fleming first presented his idea at a public meeting of the Royal Canadian Institute in 1879, an idea that was adopted worldwide in 1883 and became one of the most recognizable Canadian contributions to the world. Our Canadian journal was the first scientific journal from Canada to regularly leave our shores, exploring the ideas discussing here and other countries. In the words of Sandford Fleming, the Royal Canadian Institute was a forum for exchange of scientific ideas that would, in his words, do great good for my adopted country. I'd just like to take a little excerpt from a quote from the Institute's centennial volume of collections on the first 100 years of the existence of the Canadian Institute. Wills McLaughlin was past president and chair of the 1949 Centennial Committee, and he finishes his preface by saying, "Looking back on the changes in the last 100 years makes one pause and wonder what phases of science the Institute will be presenting in its second centenary. It would be a brave man who would even guess. If we may judge from past performance, however, the Royal Canadian Institute will find the means and the men to serve King and Canada in presenting the truths of science for the benefit of mankind." With that, I'd like to introduce Shapna Shamera, trustee of the RCI board, who will say a few words about our Fleming Medal winner. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. John Smol, this year's award winner of the Fleming Medal. Dr. Smol is a professor in the Department of Biology at Queen's University and holds the Canada Research Chair in Environmental Change. He is one of the most prominent limnologists in Canada and around the world. And in case you weren't aware, a limnologist is a person that studies inland waters. Dr. Smol has a long history of studying the most important environmental problems our world is facing long before they're trendy, including acid rain, calcium decline, contaminant transport, nutrient enrichment, and climate change. For example, he wrote one of the earliest papers on road salt increases back in 1993, long before anybody else was thinking about this issue. His research has been transformative in using long-term and contemporary records to understand global environmental change, and he has led the field to further explore these important topics. His research is driven by a blend of insightful ideas and a willingness to try new things. Dr. Smol is a prolific scientist. He has authored 21 books and approximately 600 journal articles. An example of how important research is, his research has been across fields is a number of times fellow scientists have cited his work in peer-reviewed journals or books. As of today, Dr. Smol has been cited over 35,000 times. He is the founding editor of the Journal of Paleolimnology and a leader in this important research field. His research and teaching have been recognized with numerous honors and awards. For example, Dr. Smol is a Fellow of the Royal Society, an Officer of the Order of Canada, and an NSERC Hertzberg Gold Medal, recognizing John as Canada's top scientist, among many other awards. In addition to his extraordinary research abilities, he's also been recognized for his teaching abilities, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. His mark is left at many universities around the world, with his academic children populating geography and biology departments everywhere. At York University, we're lucky to have 3 of his former students as professors, including Roberto Quinlan in biology and Jennifer Carosi in geography, continuing the tradition of excellent paleolimnological research in Canada. Most importantly, so in preparation for these remarks, I reached out to some of his former students to get some of their thoughts. And all of them said that despite all of the scientific accolades John has received and his recognition as a global leader in limnology, the most remarkable thing about John is his kindness. Regardless of his research travels to the Arctic or invited lectures around the world, John always has the time to respond promptly with words of advice and encouragement whenever anyone needs him. He's a strong advocate, a thoughtful mentor, and an invaluable resource. John has been an amazing mentor to young scientists and an inspiration in his role as a communicator of global environmental change. And now, Dr. Reinhard Rithmeyer, 117th Chair of RCIScience, will read the Fleming Citation.
Thank you. All right. So no mystery here. So the 2018 Fleming Medal is awarded to Dr. John Smol, Professor and Canada Research Chair in Environmental Change at Queen's University. So the award recognizes Dr. Smol's outstanding contributions to the public understanding of science in Canada. In particular, we recognize his commitment to speaking out about his own research and what it tells us about climate change and the future of the planet. And it can't, John, get any bigger than that. So congratulations, and Jacques will present the award medal over here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. very much. I'll leave it here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, John.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and it's a tremendous honor. A review of previous winners reveals an illustrious group of dedicated scientists, many of whom I've admired for some time. I feel I'm in very, very good company. Frankly, it's odd for me to receive an award for doing something that I love. I've always believed that it's a major privilege to be a university professor. I love universities and colleges. I love universities because they are keepers, interpreters, and disseminators of our collective knowledge. I love universities because they're also the place where we create new knowledge, knowledge that can be used to improve our lives. Universities are also where we change lives. As professors, one of our jobs is to communicate our created knowledge, i.e. the products of our research, I guess, to students and the broader public, i.e. what we often refer to simply as teaching. Our work in academic institutions reminds me of how important it is for our society to have well-informed, articulate, socially active, and thoughtful citizens to meet the challenges ahead. This is part of what we try to achieve in universities. Namely, we mentor graduates who will be prepared to tackle the problems in the world, and there's many problems we have created. I'm especially honored to have a medal associated with Sir Sandford Fleming, whom I feel I have an affinity to. For one, Sir Sandford served as president of the Royal Society of Canada from 1988 to 1989. This is a society I've been associated with for over 2 decades. And in fact, just a few weeks ago, I was elected president-elect of the Academy of Sciences of the Royal Society. Much closer to home, Sir Sandford was chancellor of my university, Queen's University, for an amazing 35 years. That would never happen now. This was during a critical period for universities in this young country from 1880 to 1915. And his footprint is everywhere at Queen's. Anytime you walk, you have footprints of Sir Sandford at that university. For example, every day I walk to the biology department where I work, and I go up the stairway, and on the second floor, there's a big museum case where we refer to as Fleming's walrus. This is also, I think, technically known as the Moncton walrus. It's fairly well known in paleontological worlds, but it's on display. It's almost a complete skeleton of an late Ice Age walrus that Sir Sandford and his team of surveyors, when they were working near a quarry near Moncton in 1871, discovered. It's almost a complete skeleton, a major specimen. That's when he was a young engineer working for the Intercolonial Railway. In addition, as many of you probably know who's visited Queen's, Queen's is fairly well known for some beautiful limestone buildings. And one of the buildings is Fleming Hall, which is 4 stories high. Now, I was a student at Queen's, so I've been walking by Fleming Hall for over 3 decades. And I never really paid too much attention to it. I noticed it was a beautiful building. But there's a story here for a paper we published on the Fleming Hall building. I've been at Queen's for some time, and I work, my research, I'm not really going to be talking about my research is working on lakes. Now lakes change over time, and we're looking at lake sediments like a time machine going back in time. And there's a connection here to what I'm about to tell you. Well, this is a beautiful building, Fleming Hall, and one of the people in my lab is Chris Grooms. He works with lakes with me, but really his real interest is ornithology, birds. And he was president of the Kingston Fields Naturalist. And they were very concerned about chimney swifts. The number of chimney swifts, like many insectivores, as many of you know, is declining dramatically. Now, they knew from historical records that the chimney, now I should just tell you, in the early days of Queen's University, in the early part of the 1900s, a large part of Fleming Hall was also part of the heating system for the university. And so that's why they had this big chimney going up the top of it. Now, they stopped using it as a heating system 1930, I believe. But since 1930, when they stopped using the heating system, up until 1993 it appeared, there used to be thousands of chimney swifts which roost in Fleming Hall chimney every night. Now, the field naturalists got very concerned. They don't see any chimney swifts in Fleming Hall chimney. So Chris Grooms went up on the chimney, and sure enough, it had been screened. And they found out that it had been screened by Queen University in 1993 because it was sanitary. They thought the birds were causing too much, they were defecating and everything in the chimney. So Chris, now that Queen's is a little more conservationist, gave permission to the field naturalists to remove the screen on the top of the chimney so that chimney swifts can come back, with the agreement that the field naturalists would clean whatever garbage is at the bottom of the chimney. Now, Chris goes down there, and he brings me down there too to look inside the bottom. And there's over 2 meters of bird poop down at the bottom of the chimney. Now, a lot of people would look at 2 meters of bird poop at the bottom of a chimney and say, someone's got to clean that up. But paleoecologists like Chris Grooms and I say, this is pretty interesting. We have decades and decades of records of what birds ate, decades and decades of records of working with Jules Blais at the University of Ottawa. We could do DDT and DDE and things like that, and metals in the bird deposit. So we actually collected the bird deposit and analyzed it for basically the remains of the insects they were eating. We could actually get a dietary history going back decades before insectivores were in decline. We could see how DDT affected their diet and all these things. Well, to make a long story short, we ended up publishing this in a high-profile journal, and it turns out that the paper went viral. When we talk about communication, I guess nobody in the journalism business could resist a story about 2 meters of bird poop, and that why someone would actually go and spend about a year studying it. And the headlines included, "Scientists crawl into tower of poo to understand reasons for swift decline." Well, this story was, we were doing interviews for at least 2 or 3 weeks. It went around the world. And in fact, still, about 7 years later, we still sometimes get asked to do an interview over the chimney swifts. It's interesting how that just captured the imagination of the world. What worries me is that we have IPCC reports on how doom and gloom, how terrible the climate situation is. And very often, we hear about it in the news for maybe a day, and it's gone the next day. Yet this is really a matter of life and death. Which actually brings me to my talk on science, communication, and literacy. Specifically, I worry where science, in a broad sense, is going in this country and elsewhere. Now, my perspective in this talk comes mainly from an environmental scientist, and I work on lakes specifically, but I think many of the issues I discuss have a much broader context. So I will focus on science mainly, and specifically where I see a developing crisis in science, literacy, and communication, and by extension, how poorly science is being used to formulate evidence-based policy. My general concern is that science, at best, is being underused by politicians and the public at large. And I would say at worst, science is being misinterpreted, misrepresented, and misused. I believe we, people like myself as academic scientists, are partly to blame for this state of affairs. Science and technology affects all of our lives, and this has always been true, but it's especially true now. If anything, the speed of knowledge acquisition and change is accelerating. Without sufficient science literacy, people will not be prepared for the rapid, dramatic changes that lie ahead, nor will voters have enough information in a democracy to participate effectively in our democratic elections. I will provide a historical example. I'm a paleoecologist, so I tend to be always looking backwards, I suppose, but I provide a historical example of how fast science and technology can change in our lives. And I always found this photograph quite interesting. This is a photograph of Fifth Avenue in New York City. It was taken on Easter morning in the year 1900. The street is full of traffic, but almost all of it is horse and buggies. Can you spot a car? Well, if you look really carefully, and I almost needed a magnifying glass, there's one car in between the horse and buggies. That's in 1900. Only one car in that whole street. The next photograph is the same street, Easter morning, same location actually, Easter morning 13 years later. Can you spot a horse and buggy? 13 years. I couldn't. I looked pretty carefully. There might be one there. but I didn't see one. That was only 13 years later. Something to think about when people say we'll never see electric cars. So just looking at 13 years difference, I think we can glean two major messages from these photographs. One, science and technology can change our lives very rapidly. And two, traffic in New York has always been a mess. Oh, the mess is not shown. I'm seeing it here, but not here. Well, something, and I can give you many examples. I'll give you one more. We're hearing all about the Russian space station, International Space Station. There were people who were alive to see the Wright brothers make their maiden flight in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, who were alive to see the Apollo moon landing. So things are changing very, 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 very quickly. Well, science and other forms of scholarship I'd say matter more now than ever before. And yet science and other forms of scholarship, I believe, that can inform evidence policy appear to be under growing attack. Now, some things have improved in this country, I would argue, in recent years, and with respect to the way some of the research in Canada is right now, in some ways, the envy of other countries, to be blunt. And we should applaud that, I think. But if history teaches us anything, it was very shortly, not long ago, that we were under attack, and we could easily be under attack again, maybe federally, maybe provincially, and certainly internationally. It was only a few years ago scientists were literally demonstrating in the street. This was some of the death of evidence rallies. This was outside Toronto, outside Ottawa in this case, a few years ago, and literally we had scientists protesting in the street. And it's useful, before I talk about, I think, some of the issues, to see how very quickly science can be under attack and how you can stop using evidence-based policy. And one of the easiest ways, and I'm going to be talking mainly about the environmental field, the first tactic is large, disproportionate cuts to, in this case, environmental departments, greatly decreasing our ability to identify and deal with complex environmental issues. And that's basically to get rid of the infrastructure and the people that find pesky problems, things that many industries and maybe certain types of governments do not wish to find. And this was, there was many ways that this was done. It was cutting in the departments in Environment Canada, it was getting rid of the Chief Science Advisor in 2008, so on and so forth. In my work with lakes, the most egregious example was the closing of the experimental lakes area. This was internationally seen as unbelievable. I forget which year it was a few years ago, probably 6-7 years ago now, I'm losing track, but not even with a press release, nothing. The experimental lakes area was closed with a memo to the employees working at the experimental lakes area. It was under the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. The experimental lakes area had been there since 1968. It was, I believe, the longest running area where we had long-term data on lakes. It was the only place in the world where you could manipulate lakes. It's world famous. I work in the water field, limnology. You can go to any water conference anywhere in the world, and all you'd have to say is ELA, and everyone knew what you were talking about. ELA was, for example, where, using these remarkable experiments, people like Dave Schindler, a former Fleming medalist, showed that you can take a lake, this is in the days in the 1960s, 1970s, when lake eutrophication, phosphorus pollution was a big issue. Just at that time, different industries that produced phosphorus didn't want phosphorus to be shown as the cause of algal blooms. So they were arguing it was nitrogen and carbon was causing algal blooms. So what Dave Schindler and his colleagues did, he found a figure 8-shaped lake. He put a sea curtain down here. He put carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus on one side, pumped in carbon and nitrogen on this side, and he said, if phosphorus is what the scientists were saying is causing the algal blooms, we should only get algal blooms on the side that had phosphorus and not on the side that had carbon and nitrogen. And I think you can see, this is where a picture tells 1,000 words. Very quickly we had phosphorus regulation. ELA was also the place, going back to other environmental problems, acidification, where I cut my teeth. They had to show very quickly what acidification was doing. What did they do at ELA? They actually added large quantities of acid to these reference lakes, and they could slowly bring down the pH, mimicking acid rain, and they could show, for example, that's what the trout looked like before they did it, that's what the trout looked like afterwards. These were very, very important issues. So you can ask, how, and they work on climate change, work on all sorts of different issues. The question can be asked, how could a supposedly progressive country like Canada cut such a program? It was outrage around the world. Now, ELA is now back. It was brought in partly by the provincial Liberals, partly by an independent agency. So the ELA is back up and running after a hiatus of about a year. But what was the excuse that we had to cut ELA? Well, the excuse was, we have to cut, everyone has to tighten their belts, it's expensive, it's very expensive, you had to do it. Well, what was the actual budget of ELA? It was about $2 million a year. That's about a nickel per Canadian. And I would say, I think most Canadians would, if they saw these numbers, not that it's $2 million sounds like a lot of money. If you said nickel Canadian, I think most people would pay 5 cents. Interestingly, a currency that government was actively talking about discontinuing because it was not worth anything. 5 cents a year to find out why my lake has an algal bloom, why my fish are dying, and so on and so forth. Really, the problem had nothing to do with money. I believe it had to do with they were producing pesky data. And I did some of these analyses at the time. The cost of one F-35 jet, you could run ELA for 44 years. That was the same year that they brought in, they gave $28 million to celebrate the War of 1812. You could have run ELA for 14 years for that. So what did the research tell us for this 5 cents a year? Why do we get algal blooms? Why acid rain is a problem? What are the problems with mercury? What are the difference with dams and so forth? All that for a nickel a year. I think most Canadians would be willing to pay a nickel a year for that. And of course, that wasn't the only thing that we have to watch out for. We have to watch out for so-called muzzling of scientists, which was up until recently, and still to some extent, some will argue, is still happening. But it really was a major issue. I work in the Arctic, a lot of work in the Arctic. I can still remember it happened, the International Polar Conference happened to be in Montreal that year. And this made also headlines around the world in that how the government scientists, when international press wanted to talk to the government scientists from Environment Canada, Department of Fish and Oceans, they weren't allowed to talk to them directly. They had to go through a so-called communications officer. I called them the tongue police. But basically, a journalist would have to present questions in advance. They would have to prepare written answers that would have to go through the communications officer. This would take weeks. I mean, certainly in journalism, no one's even going to wait. So it's a way of basically totally muzzling and changing science. And of course, that has a domino effect. The less the public hears about government scientists, less important they think they are, and more easily they can be cut. And so what comes out of this is we end up having an information vacuum that is easily filled. All these vacuums are filled. This information vacuum is filled by vested interest groups, by bloggers, by lobbyists, talk radio hosts, and so on, where the people who actually know the answers, know the evidence, aren't communicating it properly. And the general lack of science literacy gave some governments and some industries a near free hand to cherry pick science information they liked and then disregard what they didn't like. And some scientists were outraged, and I believe these scientists did make a difference. Enough was enough for many. There were groups like Evidence for Democracy and Marches for Science and other actions. Now, conditions have improved in Canada, and we shouldn't forget that. There's been substantial funding to Tri-Council. Certain governments have increased in size. As a new, highly respected chief science advisor. But our history shows, and looking at our neighbors, we are extremely vulnerable. So we should not be complacent. Evidence-based policy is the foundation for any democracy. And without truth, a democracy cannot survive. And of course, Canada is not an island. So to address today's theme of science literacy, I thought I first establish that indeed we do have a major problem with science literacy and science communication. And I think there's multiple lines of evidence that I can show that this is true. And I'd use the example of climate change, which I believe is by far the worst, not the worst, just the worst environmental problem. It's the worst problem, period, facing the planet. And I'll start with, when I was preparing these notes a few months ago for a paper I was writing, which just came out actually last week, an editorial, this came out on the press. So I'll first explore why this is a problem. There are many examples I could use, but a recent study really left me speechless. This was reported in CBC News. They reported a recent Abacus poll, a data poll study, showed that nearly 1/3 of Canadians are not convinced that climate change is linked to human and industrial activities. Now, I found this to be a remarkable finding, considering the mountains of science-based evidence that show that recent climate change is in fact very closely linked to human activities. So let's contrast what Canadians think. About 1/3 aren't convinced. Let's contrast that to what's out there in the peer-reviewed literature. I'm going to take you to the work of Dr. James Powell. There's a lot of information here. It's for me to read more than you, but who is James Powell? Well, I want to first document he's not sort of some strange tree-hugging hippie. He actually has some pretty darn good conservative credentials. He's not someone who one could argue is tainted by ideology. His biography notes he was born in Kentucky, holds a PhD from MIT, has several honorary degrees, and served as acting president of Oberlin College, president of Reed College, president of the Franklin Institute of Science Museum in Philadelphia, and president and director of the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History. President Reagan, and later the late President George H.W. Bush, I remind you, both Republican presidents, appointed him to the National Science Board, where he served for 12 years. He is currently executive director of the National Physical Science Consortium. So I believe his credentials are solid. So what does Dr. Powell do? He goes to the peer-reviewed literature and finds out what people have found in the scientific community, in the peer-reviewed literature, about climate change. And in fact, he has now gone through, in his analyses, over 54,000 papers. The last analysis I have goes up until 2015. That's the last time I saw an analysis by him. And it shows that 54,164 peer-reviewed papers concluded that human-made global warming is happening, whereas only 31 papers rejected this conclusion. So 1,747 to 1. This means about 99.94% of papers, scientific papers in the peer-reviewed literature, have concluded that humans are a cause of recent climate change, as opposed to only 0.06% who deny the connection, a ratio of about 1,747 to 1. This is similar to the percentage I've been using in my publications. About 99% of the scientific, peer-reviewed scientific literature, not on the internet, have accepted, based on their scientific analyses, that we are affecting the climate in a deleterious way. So you can compare that, as I say, to the 99.94 value in the peer-reviewed literature, to the Abacus poll that says about 1/3 of Canadians are simply not convinced. If anything tells us that we have somehow not communicated this ratio of 1,747 to 1, to think that most people think it's around 1 in 3, that we have a real serious problem. Although 27% believed there was some evidence in the poll, they also believed it was not conclusive. An astounding 11% there is little evidence to suggest there's any connection at all. On the plus side, I mean, if you want to put glass half full, half empty, 61% thought there was at least some solid evidence that it was true. But why are the numbers not higher than that? I have to look back at Dr. Powell's numbers of 1,747 to 1, and I wonder, suppose the same people who were in the Abacus poll in Canada, if they had a sick child, and they went to 1,748 doctors, and of those 1,748 doctors, 1,747 said your child needs this treatment, but one said your child's fine, who would they believe? How do we get to this poor state of science literacy and poor use of high-quality data? Why are we paying for this high-quality data if we're not using it, is another way to look at it. Science is under attack from many, many different fronts. And I think that can show many, but a growing trend that challenges our science literacy is, I believe, the precipitous drop in quality science journalism. Of course, there remains some excellent science media people in this country and elsewhere, but the number of journalists in general is declining, with especially heavy attrition to those who are specialized in serious science stories. The problem has been developing for some time. Already in 2008, the well-known science writer Peter Calamai, who's a former Fleming medalist, noted that the number of dedicated science journalists in the major media had declined dramatically. He noted that when the Canadian, I'll quote him here, when the Canadian Science Writers Association was founded in 1971, there were at least 30 staff newspaper reporters in Canada whose beat was science. Sometimes that was combined with medicine. Today, and that was 10 years ago, there are only 6, and there are fewer now. More of those have been cut since then. The situation has deteriorated even since 2008. As some excellent science journalists retire, or more often are laid off or repositioned into other departments, they are not replaced. Moreover, as Jalise Remen noted in The Guardian in 2013, the bulk of contemporary science journalism falls under the category of infotainment, with a focus on entertainment rather than science transfer, science translation. Now, I'm not saying that science discoveries should not be presented in an engaging and entertaining way. Of course they should be, but of course not without losing sight of the foundational science on which the news is based. In addition, we have celebrities like movie stars, sports heroes, espousing science advice on unsubstantiated claims like disease, vaccinations, ways to improve your health. And remarkably, our science dollars have to constantly be going to mitigate or to divert attention from these ridiculous non-scientific claims. In science, what you believe is not important. It's what you can show with data that's important. Now, when I discuss this lack of science reporting with mainstream media, because I think it's a serious issue, I am often told there's simply insufficient time or insufficient bandwidth or insufficient column space in newspapers to discuss science. But what are they discussing often in the media? I recall watching national newscasts on Groundhog Day a few months ago about the time that several key climate reports were released. Now, were any of these reports covered in any way? No. Instead, almost the entire newscast was set by which groundhog in which city saw their shadow. No wonder we have a science information crisis. To complicate matters even more, we're now hearing 42% of Canadians get their news through social media. This is from a Pew Research study just recently published, concluded that, wow, yeah, I mean, beyond issues such as confirmation bias and real fake news, not the other one can only wonder how much filtering occurs before a user gets his or her tweeted science information. And today, basically anyone with an internet access is a publisher and a potential expert. The checks and balances that scientific peer review offers have largely disappeared. Right now, papers published in Nature or the IPC or so on are counteracted by a basement blogger, and they're often discussed as if they're somehow equal. This has happened to me frequently. I'm on television or on radio, and I'm talking about some new climate finding, and then someone starts talking and says, well, I don't believe that. Well, it's not really what you believe, it's what you can show. And it's almost treated like a debate, and you try and find out who was this person. It's like they have no credentials for what they're talking about, and yet the internet has been, internet has lots and lots of big advantages, but it's also equalized. It's the loss of expertise is happening in front of our eyes. Often a basement blogger will have a much bigger audience and often much more reads than a professional scientist who has spent decades investigating the problem we're supposedly discussing. In summary, I think what I'm getting at, science dissemination is not being played on an even playing field. The lack of serious science reporting in the media allows vested interest groups, lobbying groups, and others, many of which possess remarkable resources for public relations and a large capacity for swaying public opinion, a much freer hand in delivering their messages that help them achieve their own agendas. I work in the environmental sciences, and there's much to worry about and improve upon in the realm of water. But many industry spokespeople with well-oiled campaigns, maybe pun intended, quickly will fill any information vacuum we leave, which often goes unchallenged by academic scientists. And very often, depending on the government scientists cannot speak up, and industrial scientists have their own agenda working for the industries. Often the only ones left are the academic scientists. As a consequence, I believe the onus is falling increasingly on university and college professors, scientists to facilitate information transfer in effective ways. Not only do we have to do a better job of information transfer, I think we have to do a better job of explaining to the general public of how science functions, more or less like the philosophy behind science. It's not just communicating facts or results of research in a proper way, but how science is done. And the recent survey, again, this is late 2017, so it's about a year old now. The Ontario Science Centre, right here, provided a chilling example of how the general public views science. Most alarmingly, was the finding that about half, 43% of Canadians think science is, quote, a matter of opinion. Now, this is very worrisome. I think one of our first challenges is to make clear that opinions mean nothing in science. In science, only reproducible data matter. We don't put forward a hypothesis, test it, then ask for a show of hands of who likes the outcome of our experiment. That's not how it works. Science works by falsification and repeated challenges. A hypothesis is put forward only to be tested by controlled experiments and observations, by criticism. Some examples that come from my own research area illustrate some of the misconceptions people have about how science functions and show how we, as scientists, have done a poor job of explaining how science functions. Examples include letters and emails, some of them even published in my own university magazine, the Queen's Alumni Review, that attack me personally whenever my research is shown or I'm asked to write an editorial about climate. And we just published an editorial on climate yesterday, and I'm already getting all sorts of remarkable little emails of what's wrong with a warmer winter and stuff like that. So these are coming right from my own university's magazine. 2 recurring and totally unfounded attacks repeatedly come my way, again reflecting a misunderstanding of how science functions. One recurring myth is that if a scientist wants to advance his or her career, he or she has to toe the line and follow the herd. Apparently, this is how you get promoted in science, this is how you win medals and awards in science, publish in high-profile papers, you just continue on what the other scientists said, accepting dogma. This just shows a complete misunderstanding of how science actually functions. I mean, the fuel that drives science forward is criticism. I always love this quote by Max Planck, former Nobel Prize winner, "Science advances one funeral at a time." There's no promotion in your career by showing the same thing over and over again. Complete misunderstanding. That's not how you advance your career or how you advance science. One gains recognition with new and bold ideas which can be backed up by data and that challenges the status quo. The second accusation is always hurled at me. I was recently at the Royal Society. I always love their motto. I can't read Latin, but loosely translated, and this is very loosely translated, take no one's word for it. That's the motto we have in sciences. I don't think that's a literal translation, but it says something like that. The myth number 2 that is entrenched is scientists are just looking for grant money. Now let's think about how absurd this comment is let's say in my personal case, talking about climate change. Since at least the 1990s, I have said the data are in, and this is a major problem that we have to deal with. The data are in for action. How is it then that if I have repeatedly said we have enough data and good science to take action and to move forward decisively, that is not really the type of comment from someone who says we need more data because I need more grant money. In fact, it's the other side, the side that's claiming there is no climate warming, human-induced climate warming. It's on that side that's constantly saying the research is not in, it's not definitive of. Who's looking for more grant money there? It's the other way around. Frankly, there are many other pressing environmental issues I'd frankly be much more happy researching at this moment than this. Now for some good news. I've given you a lot of bad news here, but for some good news, there were some silver linings in those polls. I had to look for them, but they were there. In the Abacus data poll on Canadians' perceptions on science, they noted that 33% of Canadians considered themselves to be science illiterate. So 1 out of 3 admitted they were illiterate in science, but that 82% wanted to know more about science. Well, that's I think, a very good piece of good news. Almost all wanted to know more. And another piece of good news, 80% want to know about science. That's what I just said, I guess. Another piece of good news is that Canadians trust academic scientists, apparently. This is the Edelman Trust Barometer. Every year, the Edelman Trust Barometer asks questions of, who do you trust, and they look at trends of who's trusted and so forth. If you look at who they trust for authority on truth, the highest category is academic experts. Interesting, the lowest category is CEOs and boards of directors. Anyway, they didn't ask me, I wasn't part of the poll, but yeah. But they see them as extremely or very credible of the 11 groups of spokespeople that they said. Well, I think we should seize the opportunity. 82% of Canadians want to know more. They recognize they don't know enough about science. 82% say they want to know more about science, and they trust us. So it seems like a lot of things are perhaps going our way. We should seize the moment. But I also believe that it's we scientists, and it's especially academic scientists in universities and colleges, who will have to take up this challenge, as other avenues of effective communication are decreasing. As I said, I think I can divide scientists into 3 different groups. There's academic scientists, there are government scientists who may or may not be able to speak, depending on the political stripe at the time, and there's industrial scientists who have their own mandates. So I ask, with all this data, why do so few academic scientists engage? We know from the studies I just discussed that Canadians overwhelmingly, 82%, would like to know more about science, and Canadian academics have the highest trust rating. So what is stopping us? Well, it's usually 4 excuses I get, and they haven't changed too much over the years, but I'll go over the 4 excuses, and I'll try and say why they're silly. The first one, always, I don't have time. Yep. I'm a busy guy too. Yes, we are all busy. I think most people in the general public would be amazed how busy academic professors are actually in their day-to-day operations. They are busy. But certainly if history teaches us anything, we need to engage more effectively for our own self-interest. There's nothing for the planet, if not for the interests of society as a whole. So we need to do it. We have to make the time. Second, the one I hear, what will my peers think? There are many pitfalls. There's a perceived notion there are many pitfalls of scientific outreach. Well, the first rebuttal I give is you're not becoming engaged to impress your peers. That's got nothing to do with it. You're becoming engaged to better inform the public, the same public who, by and large, paid for the science in the first place. I'm kind of surprised we've gotten away with it. I mean, by large part, essentially almost all my, well, industry hates me, so I don't get any industry money, but all my money is actually from taxpayers. I'm kind of surprised we've gotten away with it. We've been taking taxpayer money and then we've been publishing, but are we doing a good enough job informing them what they did with their money? Some scientists are concerned that by engaging with the public, people will think I'm just blowing my own horn, or just doing it for my own ego. When I started doing science, and I'm saying now that's about 30 years ago, I did hear such complaints. I cut my teeth in an academic researching the environmental effects of acid rain. In many respects, that was one of the first environmental problems that put scientists, in front of the radio and television and newspapers before the media. I would invariably hear, always secondhand, but I would always hear that, quote, he just likes to hear his voice on the radio, or 2, that the science was somehow tainted because the public was interested in what we were finding. Well, I don't think that excuse to engage was real 30 years ago, and it's certainly not a reasonable excuse today. My response then was the same one it is now. The public paid for this research with their tax dollars, and we are obligated to tell them what we found. And things have changed in 30 years. I mean, it's a lot easier now. Universities typically now do have communications departments. Many of us don't use them effectively. But universities have figured this out too. They said, we have to show the public of why we're relevant for our own self-interest. And they have whole agencies and within the whole buildings within the universities for getting the message out, public relations, and so on and so forth. Now, funding agencies, including the Tri-Councils, have separate sections where you try and describe how you will get the information out, what will be your knowledge mobilization strategy, and so on and so forth, how will you do outreach. So things are changing in a positive way, maybe not as fast as they should be, but things have changed in 30 years. The third, and a common one I hear, is the science I do is far too complicated for the media and the public to understand. They'll never understand what I'm doing. Nonsense. If you can't explain to an interested person of why the science you're doing is important, then you don't understand what you're doing. So that's just a ridiculous, it's an easy thing to say, but in reality has no basis in my view in fact at all. And the fourth, and one that is perhaps the most alarming, it might get unpleasant. And sure enough, it can get unpleasant. I'm getting unpleasant things on my BlackBerry as I speak for some of the things that were just released. But it can get unpleasant. I would argue that we have to suck it up and do it. True indeed. Even from my experience in dealing with environmental issues, there are many, many different ways that you can get attacked in the media and elsewhere for what you've been doing. But we're about the only ones who can actually speak on these issues. With all the academic protection we have as university professors, you would think we'd be completely unfeathered and ready to do that. And I've heard it really has become a major issue, and it's something that I think we just have to address. And this is what worries me the most, the growing threat of self-censorship. I have seen this with my colleagues in the last few years. They find something that's really quite exciting, quite important the public should know, and I say, this is a few years ago now, but I said, well, you should make that better known, send it to the media, and they go, well, I'll be applying for an NSERC strategic grant in a year. I'm going to need a letter from a certain government agency. I don't want to make too many waves. If academic scientists start self-censoring, I think there's no hope for us with all the protections that we actually have. And this is alarming. So in summary, although we may all invoke reasons not to engage, we have to be cognizant of the consequences of not engaging effectively. If we lose evidence, we lose the foundations of democracy. And there are many, many other things that will go. In universities, we search for truth. In some quarters, however, it's become acceptable to dismiss the search for evidence as the domain of the elites. We live in an era when it becomes increasingly common to receive unsubstantiated pronouncements, sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning, in tweets. The stakes are too high not to engage. We need to rebuild the trust in science. This is what we're up against. The concept of global warming was created by the Chinese to help to make U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. This came out last week. Brutal extended cold blast that lasted a day, shattered all records. Whatever happened to global warming? I love this sculpture in Berlin. This is politicians discussing global warming. I'm thinking a little bit of what's happening in Poland on this week with the IPC meetings going on. But what does it take for people to realize we are in a major international crisis? I also like this one. I don't believe in global warming is what the graffiti is being flooded over as part of the episodic weather we've been seeing. Scientists and other academics have to counter these attacks. Facts and data do matter. As the late U.S. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan noted, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. we have to be vigilant in pursuing thoughtful studies and discussions, all of which are critical for the functioning of a democracy. If facts and information are not prized and called the domain of the elite, and if these facts and information are not communicated effectively, then ideology will trump evidence. And if you don't value truth, then you don't value democracy. And yes, that means at times we are going to have to throw stones at giants. Thank you very much. Okay.
So I do have a few concluding remarks, but we have time for, I think, a few questions. It's hard to see into the audience, but maybe just shout it. Anybody? We have some microphones roaming, so just put your hand up.
Oh,
there we
lights
go.
on. Now I see more.
Fantastic. Questions?
Oh,
Yeah, we have one
microphone
here. There's a microphone coming, sir.
There's a project on in Yale. Hello? There's a project in Yale at the moment about communicating about climate change and so on. And the results are rather pessimistic, I believe. I can't quote the academic involved.
Here.
Thank you. But his point is that even if you have, once a belief becomes embedded with one's identity, no matter how much scientific facts is presented to a person, they will double down on their belief. So a question is there much inter-academic communication or work between the hard scientists and the political science?
Yeah, there's, I think this is working, but there is much more happening, but it's all happening quite recently. It's a very good point. We've often been in our own silos, the natural sciences, and we haven't effectively engaged the social scientists in a way that, not even social scientists, even in the humanities, in a way to get this information out and to understand why people are basically in denial. And you can start seeing why people are in denial. We're giving them bad news. It's like, if it's presented as, two people sitting on a stage, one saying, you have to do something and it might cost some money, and the other say, oh, everything's fine, it's going to be better. So denial is a major factor here as well. But we are talking much more to psychologists. There's I've forgot the name, but out in UBC, I believe, or Simon Fraser University is another group talking about the dragons of denial, I believe, is some of their papers. They're psychologists looking into these things. Why do people, to start studying human behavior, why is it not so we have to do much more of that. The stakes are far too high to exclude any information that's going to help us bring this to a solution. So it's a very good point. I know a little bit about the Yale group, not much, but it's something we have to start doing.
I just wanted to ask if, it's been 20-some years now we've been working on this, and I can't even begin to say how many millions has been spent on it. Have we seen any improvement? Is anything changing? And I don't see it changing, and I sort of then wonder, well, can we change it?
Well, it's a good question. 200 countries or so signed the Paris Accord. And, there are a lot of excuses why people aren't hitting targets. And one of the major, I would say there's some positive changes. The fact I still rage means I still think there's hope. But I say direction first, velocity later. We're using so much time just to get the direction in the right area. There is some movement in the right direction. The Paris Accord was a major accomplishment if people actually do what they signed off on. Even different governments, even some conservative governments have become very, very engaged in the climate change issue, realizing that they're going to have real problems, that they have to start dealing with it. So there is movement in direction. The velocity is way too slow, and we can't get that carbon back. I mean, we can, but it takes centuries and centuries to get it back. And we lose options the longer we wait. And, if we actually did the Paris Accord 20 years ago, we'd be in a lot better shape. We'd have a lot of easier options, but we didn't because we diddle-daddled and wouldn't listen to science for so long. So I think there's some positive things to say, but it's very, very late. I don't think it's too late, but it's very late. So you try not to think about it if you're in this field. Or you said, what's the point? So you just keep going. Yeah.
Hi, John. It's Megan Bahney.
How are you?
Congratulations. I'm good, thank you.
Students everywhere.
After 30 years of being an educator, and knowing that we've had climate change as a unit in our grade 10 science, which is mandatory for everybody, hopefully people are finding out more about it. Do you have any recommendations for impact on, or other things? Because, I mean, like using seatbelts, you start with the kids. From what you've been seeing, I'm not seeing, except a former student of mine has a master's in climate change, so, but I'm not seeing the impact I wanted to see on it. Any suggestions?
Well, it's tough. I think we just have to convince the young, because that's our future. We live in a democracy. We have three major sources of power, I say. One is our actions. There's a lot of things we can do in action. And it's easy to say, oh, it's so much. But if everyone did a bit, it'd be times billions, would be a lot. So our actions, there's lots of things we can do in our actions. Lots and lots of things. And that is one thing. We have power of our wallet, how we spend our money. And we can start making real decisions that we're actually going to support industries, and we're going to support products we buy that have an environmental agenda as part of their situation. Not just because it might be 10% more, but we're ready to pay that 10% to realize that we're doing something that's good for the environment. And finally, living in a democracy, we have the power of vote. And it's kind of appalling how in many countries the voter turnout is. Even our country is better than, say, south of the border, but it's still quite appalling. We have a power of vote, and when we elect politicians, make sure they understand that this is a priority item. It's very easily forgotten. We often see the environment and the economy in like inverse relationships. People say, oh, what's the cost of cleaning the environment? What's the cost of not doing it? I mean, people are asking the wrong questions. It's tens and tens and tens times more to deal with the problem than to stop the problem. So even if you want to be an economist, deal with it. But it's very hard to get this across. And there was a recent op-ed I read. It was by a conservative, actually, who's turned around and is now very concerned about climate change. And it was actually quite interesting. He said he doesn't understand some of his conservative colleagues who still fight it. He says, if they had the same, the predictions have been so correct for so many years now, if they had that same thing with the economy and they saw like it was going down like that for 20, 30 years and constantly being correct by the predictions, they would start listening to the people making the models about the predictions. Or if terrorism was going in that direction, that's all we'd be talking about. Climate has been going in that direction, following what scientists have said for decades, and they're still ignored as of not enough data out there. So part of it is because very few politicians have a scientific background. Part of it is because it's complicated and people don't see the immediate gains of something like that. We're talking about doing something for your grandchildren. People I think they love their grandchildren, but they're just, they're more worried about the mortgage at the end of the week, So it's a wicked problem. We shouldn't simplify it, but that's what we have. We made it. We got to fix it. We only got one Earth.
Give you another question here. Thank you.
John, you've made many great points. So just two questions. You think the scientific community at large has been hurt a bit because there have been many more public cases of scientific fraud, lack of reproducibility of results, just recent reports even in the psychological area, reproducibility is being found to be more and more a problem. That's one question I have. The second question is, in the climate change issue, which is indeed profound, I hear little discussion about the rapid increase in world population. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's a big factor and it's mathematically ignored. I mean, we're moving up to by 2100, 11 billion people on this earth. Imagine what it'll be in 2200. It's not taking into account, even by the scientific community.
Yeah, the second point is definitely a very serious problem, population explosion, population increases. I think it is to some extent taken up by the scientific community, but probably not enough. You know, there's enough trouble, I suppose most scientists saying we have enough trouble just trying to decrease greenhouse emission from our own cars in Canada without telling, you know, other countries what to do about their population growth. But some of those models are taking into account that even Canada, it multiplies, yes, and of course also multiplies as it's more than just multiplying often, because most countries, not only are they greatly increasing in population, they're increasing in the footprint because they're getting more money, so it's a very serious part. It is part of the problem, and we can't ignore it. So I agree with you. The first question about scientific reproducibility, it's true there have been some there are increasing numbers of high-profile cases of sometimes by not done on purpose, sometimes done on purpose, of scientific inaccuracies. Those do tend to get amplified quite a bit. I'm not sure it's happening much more now. I think now the scrutiny might be much more, because it's much easier to check on things with fast computers and everything. And we hear a lot about that, the number of retractions in Nature and Science, the two major papers. To some extent, that is the accessibility of those journals, and to some extent, they are high-profile journals, so everyone's reading them. You might write an article in a more archival journal, and maybe 10 colleagues read it. Something's in Science or Nature, hundreds of people are reading it, and it's usually a quite high-profile journal. So these are all issues that do not help, especially when you have a climate change study that has to be retracted, because the echo chamber of out there in the internet, it's all headlines, and Fox News is all headlines that, you know, that this key part of the science argument is now shown to be false, so the whole idea is false. You know, there's I forget the number, thousands and thousands of papers. You can remove 10%, 20%, 30% of the papers and say they're all wrong. It's still overwhelmingly there. So that has to be part of the formula, I think. Yeah.
Please join me in thanking John for an outstanding lecture.